There are moments in life that cannot be explained by logic or science. Something happened on that film set that would forever change the course of one man's life. Have you ever wondered if there's a border between our world and something greater? If you have ever felt that inexplicable shiver, as if someone whispered in your ear when no one was around, then perhaps you understand what happened to Jim Caviezel. It wasn't just another day of work in Hollywood. It was a movie about the Son of God. But no one expected the very script of reality to be altered before the cameras. That morning, the sun rose like any other day in Italy. The crew was preparing for another challenging scene. Jim was already in character, not only carrying the makeup, but also the spiritual weight of the role he portrayed. What would happen in the coming hours would defy everything he knew about acting, faith, and the boundaries between fiction and reality. You may not believe in coincidences. You might call it madness. But what if some experiences simply cannot be categorized by our limited systems of understanding? What if, for a brief moment, the veil that separates the visible from the invisible becomes so thin that it can be crossed? The camera started rolling. The director shouted action. And then something happened. Something that was not in the script. Something that would make all of Hollywood hold its breath. Every eye on the set was fixed on him. It was just another day filming The Passion of the Christ. Perhaps the most challenging role an actor could take on. But what no one knew was that, for Jim Caviezel, that role would become something far greater than just an interpretation. Have you ever felt that strange sensation of not being alone, even when your eyes say otherwise? That moment when every hair on your body stands on end, as if responding to a presence your rational mind refuses to acknowledge? The set was silent. A crucial scene was about to be filmed. Jim had meticulously memorized his lines, repeating them until they became a part of him. But what happened next defied all his preparation, all his professionalism, all logic. It was as if time had stopped, he later recounted. I knew my lines, every inflection, every pause. But suddenly, I heard words in my mind, words that weren't in the script. And the most frightening part, it wasn't my inner voice. Can you imagine that feeling? Being in the midst of one of the most intense moments of your career and, suddenly, hearing a voice that isn't your own. A voice that seems to come simultaneously from within and from without. The director did not yell cut. The cameras kept rolling. The other actors continued with their marks. No one noticed that something extraordinary was occurring within Jim's mind. Or perhaps it was happening beyond it. The words came with a terrifying clarity, he explained. And with them, a knowledge that I did not possess. Details, feelings, and purposes that were not in the script. That simply could not be in the script. And in that moment he knew. He wasn't just portraying Jesus. In some inexplicable way, he was experiencing something that transcended acting. Critics called it a coincidence. Skeptics said it was the result of deep immersion in the role. Psychologists spoke of altered states of consciousness during intense performances. But don't you know when an explanation is simply not enough to account for what you felt? The script said one thing, but I heard something completely different. Jim confessed in an interview that left the interviewer visibly unsettled. It was as if two realities coexisted at that moment, the one of the film we were making and another, somehow more real. When asked which exact words he had heard, Jim hesitated, his eyes fixed on a distant point, as if reliving the moment. Some of them are too personal to share, he said, but I can say they weren't words from a script written by men. They were words that seemed to know my heart better than I did. Have you ever experienced something so profound that words seem inadequate to describe it? How do you explain colors to someone who has been born without the ability to see them? The film crew noticed changes in Jim during those specific scenes. The lead cinematographer remarked that something in his gaze had transformed. I've filmed hundreds of actors, he commented. I know how to recognize when someone is performing, even brilliantly. But what I saw that day, his eyes seemed to look through the camera, through me, as if seeing something none of us could perceive. The unscripted words came with an intense physical sensation. It was as if every cell in my body vibrated at a different frequency. Jim described. I felt no fear, which is strange considering the intensity of the experience. On the contrary, I experienced a peace I had never known before. And what if these experiences aren't as rare as we think? What if most people simply dismiss them as imagination, stress, or coincidence? How many connections with something greater do we lose in our everyday skepticism? That wasn't the only time. In the days that followed, Jim Caviezel began to notice a pattern. In certain scenes, unwritten words flowed into his mind with crystalline clarity. The phenomenon wasn't constant, but when it occurred, it was unmistakable. There was a different quality to those words, he explained, as if they carried a weight, an authority that transcended the script. On several occasions, I even asked the director if he had altered the text without telling me. The director, intrigued by Jim's recurring questions, began to pay closer attention. During one particularly powerful scene, he noticed the actor improvising with words that, remarkably, seemed more genuine than those originally written. "What are you doing?" the director asked after shouting cut. "I'm just saying my lines," Jim replied, confused. "No, you completely changed the text in that scene." Jim turned pale. He hadn't realized that he had spoken aloud the words he had heard internally. Have you ever caught yourself doing something without full awareness, as if a deeper part of you had taken control? As if, for a moment, you were merely an observer of your own actions? The other actors began to notice. An actress who shared a crucial scene with him remarked, "There were moments when it didn't seem like we were acting with Jim. It was as if, I know this sounds absurd, but it felt like we were truly in the presence of Jesus. Not because of the makeup or the character, but because of something in his gaze, in his very presence." The production went on. Jim tried to rationalize what was happening. Perhaps it was only the result of months of preparation, of profound study into the historical and spiritual figure he was portraying. Perhaps his subconscious was generating those words from all he had learned. But then came the moment that would shatter any rational explanation. During a scene in Aramaic, a language Jim had learned only well enough for his lines, he suddenly began to speak fluently, improvising sentences that were not in the script. Sentences that, later on, experts confirmed were grammatically correct and contextually perfect. "How do you explain that?" he wondered. "I could barely memorize the few phrases I needed to say. Suddenly, I was speaking as if I had known the language for years." The phenomenon intensified as filming approached the climax of the story. The unscripted words came with increasing frequency and clarity. And most disturbing of all, they started to reveal knowledge that Jim did not possess. There was a moment when I found myself speaking about historical details of ancient Jerusalem that I simply didn't know, he confessed years later. Details that I later discovered were accurate, yet they were not found in any of the materials I had studied for the role. Can you imagine the sensation of having knowledge you know is not your own? Of speaking about things you never learned in the conventional way? The crew began to treat Jim differently, not with fear, but with a kind of silent reverence. Something was happening, something that no one dared to name outright. It was Jesus speaking to me. Jim finally verbalized what he had been feeling. "I know how it sounds. I know many will think it's madness, or that I'm seeking publicity. But how can I deny what I experienced?" Eventually, filming ended. The movie was released and made the impact everyone had expected. But for Jim Caviezel, the real impact had occurred behind the scenes, in experiences that no camera could capture. "That film set became a sacred place for me," he reflected. "A portal between worlds, if I may call it that. A place where the line between performance and reality dissolved. What if the boundaries we draw between the natural and the supernatural are far more porous than we imagine? What if, in certain moments, under specific circumstances, those boundaries can be crossed?" Years passed. Jim Caviezel built a solid career in Hollywood, but no role ever compared to that one. No professional experience ever came close to what he lived through during those weeks of filming. "Sometimes I still hear that voice," he admitted in a rare interview on the subject. "Not with the same intensity or clarity, but like a distant echo. In moments of doubt or difficulty, those words not in the script return to my mind." Hollywood did not know how to react to Jim Caviezel's story. Some executives suggested he keep those experiences private, fearing they might affect his career. Others saw a marketing opportunity, an idea that Jim vehemently refused. "This is not a story to sell tickets," he insisted. It is something sacred that happened to me, something that changed who I am. Have you ever experienced something so transformative that it became a turning point in your life? A before and after so clearly defined that it seems you have become a different person? Jim began receiving letters from people all around the world, not only from fans of the film, but from individuals who felt that in some way. His experience validated their own spiritual encounters that they had never dared to share. I received accounts from doctors, scientists, and highly educated, rational people, he recounted. People who lived through inexplicable moments of connection with something greater and who, for the first time, felt they could speak about it without being ridiculed. A prominent neurologist took an interest in the case. Rather than dismiss the experience as mere hallucination or suggestibility, he proposed a fascinating theory. There are states of consciousness that neuroscience still cannot fully map. States where perception expands beyond normal limits. What Jim experienced may have been one of those states, amplified by deep immersion in the role and the emotionally charged environment of the set. Have you ever wondered if our understanding of reality is merely the tip of a much larger iceberg? If what we call normal is just a small fraction of what is possible to experience? Jim Caviezel never wavered in his story, even when that meant being ridiculed or having career opportunities denied to him. Some truths are worth more than a career, he stated. And then, years later, came the revelation that would shock Hollywood. One of the production assistants had secretly recorded audio during the scenes in which Jim claimed to have heard the voices. The recordings captured moments where he clearly spoke words that were not in the script, words in Aramaic that, when translated, revealed a theological depth that experts confirmed was consistent with ancient texts not available to the production. How do you explain that? Asked an influential film critic, long a skeptic of the story. How could an actor with limited knowledge of Aramaic improvise dialogues that are theologically complex and historically accurate in a dead language? Jim's answer remained the same over the years. It was Jesus speaking to me. And perhaps the most important question is, what if he is telling the truth? What if, for a brief moment on that film set, the veil between worlds truly lifted? What would that mean for everything we think we know about our reality? You don't have to believe it. The very nature of transcendental experiences is that they resist external verification. But perhaps, just perhaps, by keeping your mind open to possibilities beyond what we normally accept, you too might hear words that aren't in any script written by human hands. Because in the end, the deepest truth about Jim Caviezel's experience may not be about what happened on that set, but about what can occur within each of us when we are truly open to the inexplicable. Are we ready to listen?